Good morning, and welcome to Chapter 2 of OK for Now, read by yours truly, Mr. Hart. Now, as a quick recap from yesterday's reading, yesterday we were introduced to our lead protagonist, Doug Swiatek. Doug and his family are currently in the process of moving to Marysville, New York. His father got a new job there. Now, when we were introduced to our characters, we found out that Doug has two older brothers, both of which seem to be a little bit mean and rude to him at times. Doug also has a very abusive father. We have seen in the first chapter that his father is known to be both verbally and physically abusive. Also, Doug has a very lovely mother. In the first chapter, Doug finds himself, when he goes to Marysville, New York, he ends up stumbling upon a library. There he meets a girl named Lil Spicer. They have some laughs. She makes fun of him. She gets Coke spilt all over him. And from there, he ends up going inside the library, and he ends up finding this wonderful plate inside a book of this beautiful, beautiful bird. Doug becomes fascinated with the bird and wants to go back and see it as often as possible. Also along the way, Lil, although they originally have a rocky start, Lil invites him to have a job at her father's store, which is the local deli. So when we're going to begin right now, we will start at Chapter 2, which everyone, that is page 33. And it is called Chapter 2, The Red-Throated Diver. Once again, I want everyone to take note of the bird that starts the chapter. In our last chapter, we had a bird that was kind of falling down. I want you guys to take note that usually every single bird that begins the chapter is going to somehow relate to the events going on in Doug's life. So in the first chapter, the bird is falling down, and it's kind of symbolizing that Doug's life is about to fall down because he is in the process of having to move, uproot his entire life, make new friends, and all that. So for this chapter, we see these birds, and as we read, we're going to try to figure out, okay, how do these birds relate to Doug's life? Let's begin, shall we? The next Saturday. The Saturday before going to begin my new job at Spicer's Deli, which if they thought I was any good, I would have been starting by now. I was waiting at the library steps. Again. People who passed by looked at me like I didn't belong. Again. I hate stupid Marysville. And every few minutes I went up the 6 steps to the library doors and tried them, and they were, of course, still locked. So I just go sit down. I waited for what must have been an hour until finally the woman with her glasses on a chain looped around her neck. She already had them looped around her neck, even though she wasn't even in the library yet. She came walking up the block and climbed up the stairs and looked back down at me like I was trespassing. "The Marysville Free Public Library does not open until 10 o'clock, she said. "I know," I said. "These steps were not made for people to sit on," she said, "especially since we might get in the way of others who would wish to use them." I looked up and down the block and then moved away over to the edge of the steps. Dang! I didn't see all the people jamming to get inside. Don't they all know that the Marysville Free Public Library does not open until 10 o'clock? She sniffed. And I'm not lying, she sniffed. "Go find some other place to be rude," she said. "Oh, is this place reserved only for you to be rude?" I said. "I know." I was sounding like Lucas again, wasn't I? So she took out the key from her purse, put it into the door, and she opened it, and then went inside. And she clanged the door shut behind her. She turned the bolt in the lock hard enough for me to hear. I hate this stupid town. I hate it. So I waited on the steps, right in the middle of them, my legs all spread out as far as I could spread them. It wasn't too much longer before an old guy came from the other direction. He had glasses on a chin looped around his neck too, and I almost told him what a jerk he looked like with those glasses looped around the neck. Except I figured it wouldn't make any difference. He probably wouldn't even care that he looked like a jerk. "You're an eager one," he said. "But the library doesn't open till 10 o'clock. "Yeah, that's what I've been told," I said. And he laughed, like there was something funny about it. "I see you've met Mrs. Merriam. Is that why you're sitting like that?" I looked at him. He had hair coming out of funny places, like his ears, his nose, between his eyes. He didn't keep those looped glasses just to look like a jerk. "I guess," I said. "You should be glad she hasn't called the policeman to have you removed." He pulled out a pocket watch. I'm not lying. He pulled out a pocket watch and he flipped it open. It's already past 9:30. I think we'll undermine all the laws and order in the state of New York if I let you in. He put his pocket watch back and then took the steps kind of slowly. He puffed his breath out when he reached the top. There seems to be more of these every time I climb them, he said, referring to the steps. And then he took a key from his pocket. The library was even cooler than it had been a week ago, and it was darker too. And since the only light came through windows that were stained yellow and didn't let in all that much. Miss Merriam glanced up from the desk, and when she saw me, the look on her face was that same look she probably gave to the bottom of her shoe when she stepped in something that she didn't want to step in. The library does not open till 10 o'clock, she said. That's exactly right, said the man, who was still puffing a little. Mr. Powell, she began. Please, just this once, let's let him in, he said. You don't know the meaning of just this once. How many times have you let that Spicer girl in early just this once? For which she will one day thank us when she dedicates her first book to the Marysville Free Public Library. Mr. Powell turned to me. Perhaps you will do the same. Now, is there anything I can point you towards? I shook my head. No, I'll just look around. He nodded. If I were you, he said, I would start to the 900s over there, but that's just because I've always been partial to biographies. I didn't even go over to 900s. First I tried the 500s, and then they looked pretty dull if you ask me. And then I went over to the 600s, which looked a whole lot duller, and I'm not lying. The 700s were better, and I looked through a bunch of them to see if I could find a picture of the Arctic tern. But I couldn't. I guess you're wondering why I didn't go up to the book on the second floor right away. I mean, that's what I was there for, not for those stupid biographies in the 900s. But I think it was because I didn't want Miss the library isn't open Merriam's eyes looking at me like I was something on the bottom of her shoe when I went up there. I just didn't want it. So I messed around in the 700s looking for those turns until I saw Mr. Powell head over to the front doors to unlock them, and then a bazillion people who had been waiting outside would probably be spreading themselves all over the 6 steps to come in. And to be honest, some did come in, and the library began to hum with talk that carried because of the marble, and Mrs. Merriam adjusted her loop glasses and started checking in returned books and telling people to keep their voices low. And I crossed the hall and I went up the stairs. No one had come up here yet, so the lights hadn't been turned on. But that Arctic tern was still there, falling. The morning sun had slanted through the windows. They were stained yellow up here, too. The sun shone with the water darker and rougher. And then that terrified eye. I put my pretend pencil over the glass case again, and I started drawing the wings. I drew the lines down from the wingtips and then sharply back up into the body. I tried to fill in the 6 rows of feathers, keeping them all the same in each row until I came in close where the feathers faded into the body. Dang! They looked like fur. I could feel the wind rush over their tightness, then following the line down the bird towards the water, curving it up around its neck a little. No, a little less, and then back down towards the water, ending the perfect point of the lower beak, where it stopped being a beak and it became air. And then the light snapped on. Mr. Powell. Puffing a lot. And he looked at me, a little surprised. He had his glasses on instead of looped around his chest, so he didn't look like too much of a jerk. Oh, I'm sorry, he said. I should have turned these lights on a little sooner. It doesn't matter to me. He walked over to stained glass and looked down into it. Sterna arctica, he said. I looked at him. The Arctic tern, I said. I didn't want him to think I was a chump, like I didn't know the bird. That's right. There used to be a little card here somewhere. Isn't it a beauty? You can feel it plummeting through the air. I didn't say anything. I came up to turn the page. I do it once a week, but I can wait if you want. I shrugged. He looked down at that sterna bird. I think I'll wait, he said. Who drew this? He turned and pointed to the picture of the wall. He did. John James Audubon. Almost 150 years ago. He looked into a glass case. You want to try drawing it yourself? I shook my head. No, I don't draw. Have you ever tried? I said, I don't draw. So you did. I'll leave the book open to this page, and if you change your mind or want to read about the artist, I'll I turned and left before he could finish. What a jerk. Didn't he hear me say I don't draw? Chumps draw. Girls with pink bicycle chains draw. But I don't draw. Was he old and deaf? I hate this town. A week later, I wasn't at the library when it opened at 10 o'clock, and if you've been paying attention, you should know why. See, I was over at Spicer's Deli before 9, still tasting the salt and peppery fried eggs that my mother had made me before I left. Mr. Spicer and Lil were standing by the two wagons, and one was already packed with filed brown bags. Lil will have the second one waiting for you by the time you get back from the first run, Mr. Spicer said. He handed me a drawn map with the houses of the customers marked and told me the order that I should go in, which depended on how far away the houses were and how much ice cream was going to go in each brown bags, which made a lot of sense since it already somewhere up in the 80s probably, and the white haze in the air said it was going to be a whole lot hotter too. Do you want to warn him about Mrs. Windemere now or later? Said Lil. Mr. Spicer looked up. He doesn't have anything to worry about, he said. Lil looked at me and mouthed, Yes, you do. All the houses in the first run are within a couple of blocks of the deli, so it shouldn't take long if you put your mind to it. You better get going or the ice cream's going to start to melt. And so I got going. But I'm not lying, it wasn't so easy to match Mr. Spicer's hand-drawn letters to the letters of the street signs, and so it probably did take a little longer than it would have for someone who had lived his entire life in its stupid Marysville, which Mr. Spicer didn't seem to understand as well as he should. You ought to pick up the pace if we're going to get all these orders delivered, he said when I got back. And I nodded. Lil's got the next wagon all set, right? Here's the map. You get to know all these by heart, but you're going to have to keep your mind on it this time. Pfft, terrific. Are you going to warn him about Mrs. Windemere now? Said Lil. I set out again, dragging the wagon behind me, and after 10 minutes I had no idea how to find any of the streets on the map. And so I had to stop and ask someone who was edging the lawn in front of her house, like it really mattered to anyone if her grass was cut in a straight line. I held out the map and I asked if she knew where the street was from the first house. She put down her edger, took off her garden gloves, and looked at the map. Oh, that's Gardiner. That's the street, she said. And she pointed up the sign to the corner. Didn't you see it? No, I didn't see it, jerk. I wouldn't have asked you if I had seen it, would I? That's what I wanted to say. So number 19 would be, I said, it's a few houses down on the other side. Evelyn Mason's place. It's a bright yellow one with the white impatience in the front porch. So I headed down to Evelyn Mason's place with the stupid white impatience under the stupid porch. And I knocked on her stupid door, and I handed over stupid bags of stupid groceries, and I showed her the stupid map, and I said, I have to get over to... And from there, she just pointed to me the rest of the way. And that's how I got to the rest of the Saturday morning houses. I showed the customer the map, and they pointed the way. And it worked pretty well. Well, until Ernie Echo drove by and said what I was doing, and he said, what was I doing? And I told him, and then he asked if I needed help finding the houses, and I said I did. So he took the map, and then he told me the way to the house after that one that I was already headed to. But he told me to go in completely the wrong direction, and by the time I figured that out and turned around and found the last house, their ice cream had mostly melted inside the foil bag, and then they said they wouldn't pay for it. So I took it back. Mr. Spicer said that it could happen on anyone's first day, but I shouldn't let it happen again, and then the next time he would have to take it out of my salary. Ernie Echo probably thought he was a barrel of laughs. What a jerk. He probably thought I was a chump. What a jerk. Then Mr. Spicer nodded to the last wagon. This one's from Mrs. Windemere, he said. Lil whistled kind of low, like something out of the Twilight Zone. Mrs. Windemere, I said. This one's got ice cream too. Lemon ice cream, which is expensive. So pay attention. I nodded. I wondered if he might hand me a cold Coke before I left. The mercury just had left 90 a long time ago. I sure did know what to do with a really cold Coke now. Mrs. Windemere is supposed to pay you, Mr. Spicer said. Cash on delivery. But sometimes she tries to charge it, but then she forgets and I have to drive over there and because she's forgotten and she didn't pay and we have a really unhappy scene. So make sure you come back with her. He looks down at the bill. $22.78. Okay, I said, waiting for that cold Coke to help me on this really hot day. Waiting for that cold Coke. Waiting for that cold Coke. And you're not going to need a map for this one, Mr. Spicer said. Go over to the library, take the street that runs into it. That's Green Street. And head out until the house stops and there's a big field. Go across that big field and you'll see this huge brick house. That's where Mrs. Windemere lives. You got it? $22.78, I said. Mr. Spicer nodded. Get it in hand. A Coke, I thought. Please, I could really use a Coke with this ice coming down the sides. He looked at me. Are you waiting for something? I wouldn't be in such a hurry either if I were him, Lil said. So I set off on the last run of the Saturday deliveries. I decided if I found any sprinklers going, I'd jump through them, since everything I was wearing was already dripping wet anyways with sweat. But there weren't any sprinklers the whole way. Are you surprised? There never are. Do you know how many blocks there were before the house started thinning out after the library? There were 14 blocks that I had to walk. Do you know how many trees there are along the road of those houses that they gave you? 6. Do you know how much shade that gave? Maybe a tiny bit more than 0. Do you know how big that field was before Mrs. Windemere's house? It was big. And the path that I had to drag that wagon on wasn't exactly mowed either. So by the time I got there, I couldn't believe I was still sweating, since it felt like any liquid must have baked out of me by now. I couldn't believe that there was still frost on the metal foil around the expensive lemon ice cream. Mrs. Windemere's house spread out to the end of the long brick path, and the bricks were baking hot that led up from the road through the gardens on either side that had just been sprinkled with sprinklers, which were turned off now, of course, and then past some tall evergreens, and then into some high trees that finally spread some shade down unto the world, and then through more gardens with flowers that I could have died to bring home to my mother, and finally more baked bricks right up to the house. It was the biggest house I'd ever seen one person had owned. I mean, there were pillars in the front. Pillars! There were more windows than Camiller Junior High School. This green and white ivy climbing up everywhere. And there was a door with a round window over it. That's right, the window was over it. No one could even look in through it. It was that high up in the air. The house was quiet under the trees. There was no wind. The only thing I heard was someone pecking at a typewriter, and then the tiny little bell dinging when whoever was typing reached the end of the line. But nothing else. It was like even the birds knew that they better be quiet around this place, because I guess no one was supposed to disturb the great Mrs. Windemere. So I left the wagon at the front of the steps, and I let up the door, and I rang the doorbell, and I stepped back. Typing not stopping, the little bell was still dinging. So I waited for a while. But the typing was not stopping, and the little bell was still dinging. So I went up and I rang the doorbell again. Twice. And I knocked. Twice. Typing, stopping. I took a step back, which turned out to be a really good thing because the door suddenly swung open and there was Mrs. Windemere. At least I figured it had to be her. She had hair as white as clouds and was about as wispy too, and big. It was all gathered like one of those huge thunderheads that rises on a hot summer day. The top was in sort of a bun and tied tight with a red rubber bands. And in that top bun, I am not lying, there were 3 bright yellow pencils stabbing through her hair. She wore a bluish kind of gown that shimmered. It looked like something that someone was about to go on an opera would wear. Not that I've ever been to an opera or would be caught dead at one. I mean, can you imagine Joe Pepitone ever going to an opera? And with the cloud on the top and the shimmering blue beneath, she looked like a rainstorm that had walked all around all by itself, which wouldn't have been so bad on a day that wanted to be 800 degrees. All this, by the way, took about half a second to see because she hadn't even finished opening the door when she said, "Who are you?" That's not really what she said. She used a word that I would never have heard a lady use before. It came pretty close to who. You can figure out what it was by yourself. Who do you think I am? I said. I know I was sounding like Lucas, but you have to remember that she started it, and it was hot out, and Mr. Spicer hadn't given me that really cold, ice cold Coke that I wanted. You know, the one with the ice coming down the sides. She looked behind me at the wagon. I think you are a very skinny and very rude delivery boy, and you are a very skinny and very rude delivery boy whom I have no time for right now. Go away and come back later this afternoon. She closed the door. Hard. Typing again up something. Little bell dinging. I could almost hear Lil snorting back at the deli. So I stood up there for a couple minutes. To be as thirsty as I was, you'd have to be in the French Foreign Legion and lost somewhere out in the Sahara for a week. I thought about dragging that wagon back down the baking brick walk and through the field to the road. I thought about dragging the wagon down all the way the 14 blocks to Spicer's Deli. And then I thought about doing it all over again in the afternoon. And so I rang the doorbell. Ding dong! Typing, not stopping. Little bell still dinging. I rang that doorbell again. Twice. Not. Twice. And I stepped back, typing, stopping, and this time the door opened even more quickly. Do you know what creativity is? Mrs. Windemere said. You have to admit, this is not something you expect a normal person to say. I'm not sure, I said. I'm sure that you do not know, or would not be ringing my doorbell. Creativity is God, who comes only when he pleases, and it isn't very often. But when he does come, he sits beside my desk and folds his wings, and I offer him whatever he wants. In exchange, he lets me type all sorts of things that get turned into plays, for which people who own New York stages are waiting. And right now, he is sitting by my desk, and he is being very kind. So if you would go away and... Suppose you offer him some ice cream, I said. Would he stay longer, maybe? She looked behind me again at the wagon. Ice cream, she said, and I nodded. What kind did I order again? Lemon. She considered this. Lemon, she said, and I nodded again. She looked at the wagon once more. Go around back. There's a door into the kitchen. Put everything away where it's supposed to go. And if you cannot figure out where something is supposed to go, for heaven's sakes, don't come and ask me. Leave it on the kitchen table. You better start with the ice cream and do not make any noise. She closed the door again, hard, again. And I followed the brick path around the house to the back. I should tell you that there is no shade around the side of the house, so things were getting pretty desperate in the thirsty department. The kitchen door was up 3 steps, so I grabbed the ice cream and I headed up. But the door was locked. Of course it was locked. So I thought about going around and ringing the doorbell again. I thought about walking away and leaving the whole thing right there. Melted lemon ice cream all over her back steps. But instead, I looked under the mat by the door, and there it was, the key. Pretty sneaky of Mrs. Windemere. No one would ever think to look there if he wanted to break in while she was away at the opera. So here are the stats for my Mrs. Windemere's kitchen. The floor was white and yellow tile. 24 tiles white, wide, 18 tiles long. 1 rack with 16 copper pots and pans hanging over a woodblock table. 4 yellow stools around the woodblock table. 12 glass cupboards, all white inside. And you could have put my mother's dishes into any one of them and you would still have plenty of room left over. And the dishes! They were all white and yellow. And the glasses! Who knows how many glasses there were, but they were all matching. There was not a single glass that was even chipped. You know who deserves the kitchen like this, right? I don't have to tell you. Yeah, you can figure out who deserves this kitchen. But before I did anything, I drank about 1.5 gallons from the faucet. I put my head under and I just let the water run. I didn't even care if Mrs. Windemere came in and saw me doing it. It wasn't like I was using one of her glasses. And it did taste so good. Honestly, at that moment, that water tasted even better than that really cold Coke. Then I put all the groceries away, starting with the lemon ice cream into the freezer. And I left the fresh beans and carrots and onions on the woodblock table. But everything else got put away in the cupboards that, if you ask me, were pretty full already. But no one was asking me. I took another long drink on the road, another 1.5 gallons, I'd say. And then I started out the back door, but suddenly I remembered the $22.78. I could hear the typing and the dinging through the house. They were going pretty steady. Probably the god of creativity was still being good to her. But I needed that $22.78. So I swung open the door out of the kitchen. I went to her dining room. It was cool and dark and full of roses, big red ones on black wallpaper, and big red ones in vase in the middle of the dark table that looked like it should be in a museum or something. And I followed the sound of that typing and the dinging down a long, long hall with walls hung with frames, photographs of actors and actresses like Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor and Yul Brynner and his bald head and Telly Savalas and his bald head and Danny Kaye and Lucille Ball even. They were all posing on stages. And then the hall led into a bright sitting room that was all yellow and white again. And then down towards the short hall, there was a glass door with diamond panes. And behind that, I could see Mrs. Windemere, who was typing wildly now. Sometimes her hands went high above her shoulders before they dropped down to smack on the keys. And by the way, there wasn't any god sitting next to her in a chair by her desk with his wings folded either. He couldn't have sat there even if he wanted to. The chair was filled with books, most of them lying open, one on top of another. So I waited before knocking at the glass door, and I'm not lying, her typing was a sight to see. But I couldn't stand there forever, and so I knocked. Typing not stopping, little bell still dinging, and I knocked again. Twice. Oops, sorry everyone. My bad, too intensive knocking. And without turning around, she waved her hand to shoo me away. And so I knocked again. Both hands up on her shoulders this time, both hands dropping down the typewriter. She turned around slowly, and there was this look on her face that, well, if she had reached for one of those sharp pencils, that stabbed through her bun, I think at that moment I would have been a goner. "What is it now?" she said. "I have a bill. It's $22.78. You have to remember that we are talking at this moment through the door here, which made the whole thing kind of weird. It was like I was talking through glass to some kind of prison inmate. "Just put it on my account," she said. She turned back towards the typewriter. "No, I can't. Mr. Spicer wants me to bring him cash back now." She was working over her typewriter. "Mrs. Windemere," I said. "Arg!" She said, "Arg!" Just like that. I'm not lying. And then she stood up and she grabbed the door handle, which was glass too, by the way, and she threw the door open. "You fix the typewriter keys," she said, "and I'll get the money." So I went into the room. It was bigger than I had thought. Its walls kept going back and back, and every wall had dark bookshelves to the ceiling, and every bookshelf was crammed. And out of the floor there was a round table heaped with books, and beside that there was a dark couch covered with rows of books. Everywhere on the floor, piles of books leaned into one another, and on the sides of her desk and in front of her desk, there were more piles leaning. I never thought that one person could own so many books, so I picked one up off the desk and I smelled its pages. The smell of old paper. I worked at separating the keys in her typewriter, and I found out pretty quickly that the trick is to just take one key at a time and just let the ink get all over your hands. And I got most of them done by the time Mrs. Windemere got back. She threw $25 at me. I don't think I have any change," I said. "Just keep it," she said. "Splurge, go on a shopping spree. Book a trip to Monte Carlo. Do whatever you want, but do it away from me, okay? Here, stop fussing with that. You're going to get all the things all inky." She then took over the typewriter keys, and I think by the time I backed out of the room with the $25, she had forgotten I was even there. $22.22. It was the only $2.22. It was the only tip I'd gotten all day, but it was a good one. $2.22. Do you know what you can do with $2.22? I had never had that much money of my own ever. $2.22. So maybe it was because I was thinking about that $2.22 that I turned the wrong way in that short hall and got into a room I hadn't been in before. It was all light blues with white furniture and a white fireplace with small stone lions on either side and another vase on a dark table filled with pink roses. But over the fireplace, there hung another huge picture of birds. It was the same size as the one of the Arctic tern, and by John Audubon's, again, I could tell it was another John Audubon picture. But this picture was different. One bird was the mother, two were swimming away, doing what they felt like doing, not even looking at her. And there was this small bird, pretty young. It was looking like maybe it wanted to swim where the other two birds were, but maybe not. And anyway, he was afraid to try. And the mother, her neck was turned all around about as far as it could possibly go, and she was looking far away at something a long way from the picture. She was looking at a place she wanted to go, but she couldn't because she didn't know how to get away. There were flowers beside her. I stood there looking at that picture for a long time, even after the typing and ding started up again. The little one didn't know what he wanted to do at all, and I reached up and I touched the glass over it. It was cold. And then I found the kitchen again, and I went out and I locked the door behind me, and I hid the key in the not-so-secret spot that no one would ever think to look in. I wiped my inky hands on the grass, and I dragged the wagon back to Spicer's Deli. And when I pulled the wagon inside, Mr. Spicer looked at his watch and then at me, like I hadn't been paying attention. "Did you see Mrs. Windemere?" said Lil. "Yep," I said, and I handed Mr. Spicer the $25. He counted it, took it to the register, and paid out my tip. "That's pretty nice," he said, and I nodded. Well, what?" I said. "I pay salary every other Saturday," Mr. Spicer said. "Okay," I said. I still have my $2.22 in hand. "That's fine. I know, I'm a chump." "So what happened?" said Lil. And at that moment, Mr. Spicer handed me a nice cold Coke. You remember, right, that I know what to do with a really ice cold Coke? I know how to drink them now. And I did it, except the burps, and Mr. Spicer was right there. "Not a thing," I said when I finished. "You skinny thug," said Lil. And I handed her the bottle. I burped when I got onto the street. And I'm not lying, it was a pretty good one, too. Birds flew out of the maples. So I put that $2.22 in my pocket, and I went up to the library. Mrs. Merriam looked at me, then went back to whatever she was working on and let me know that I wasn't worthy of Her Majesty's attention. So what? So what? It wasn't like I needed her attention. I just came to the library to see if I could get that beak right, which I probably couldn't do on account of how I don't draw. You know, I told Mr. Powell I couldn't draw, and I don't draw. So what? So I went upstairs. The lights were on. Mr. Powell hadn't even turned the page of the book, and it was still open to that Arctic Tern. And there was one thing, though, that was different. There were 3 large blank sheets of paper on the glass display case. And there was 5 colored pencils, gray, black, green, blue, and orange. Dark orange. They were all sharp, and there was an eraser, too, waiting like I had ordered them myself. So I ran my hand over the glass on top of the Arctic Tern, and then I left. I didn't touch anything since I don't draw, remember? But that night at supper, my father asked if I started a job, and I nodded. Did I get paid? Well, I got paid in tips. Tips, that's all? Tips? Didn't I get paid for the day? I told him I got paid every other Saturday. He told me I was a chump and that he and my brother, then they both laughed at me like I was the jerk of the world, like I was never going to see any of that money, like I was about as useless as a rubber crutch. My mother turned and looked out the window at something far away. But the next week, I ran into Lil Spicer 3 times. And the first time, I looked like a chump. The first 2 times, actually. See, the first time, I had finally jumped under a sprinkler because it was so hot the sidewalks were white and shimmering. And if there was any place within 10 miles to go swimming, I didn't know about it. I guess I got desperate. So I jumped under a sprinkler not so far from the library, and it was perfect. And I had just come out from under it when, of course, Lil Spicer turned the corner of her bike, looking as cool as if she had been in the Monte Carlo or something. And as soon as she saw me, she started to laugh. "Did you fall into a pool?" she said. And it took her a while to say this, and she was mostly snorting. "No, I didn't fall into a pool," I said. "Did you? Oh my goodness, you did! You went into the sprinkler, didn't you?" I didn't say anything. What would you have said? "You're trying to stay cool by running under the sprinkler, just like when you were a cute little boy instead of a skinny thug." "Yes, I'm trying to stay cool." "I suppose that is one way to do it." "Yes, it is one way to do it." Lil Spicer started to laugh again. "Ah! That's a pretty dumb way," she said. "Yeah, thanks for pointing that out," I said. And then I went on to the not-so-hot, white-hot sidewalk, wishing that I wasn't squishing so much. "You're leaving? You're leaving footprints," she pointed out, and she was laughing so hard at this point, she was almost even crying. I hate this town. But the second time I saw her was on Friday. I was heading towards the library, and yes, I know it's not open on Friday, but who knows, maybe a miracle would happen, and maybe it would be open after all. So I was heading to the library, and when I turned the corner there, 2 blocks away was my brother with a new group of criminals. It hadn't taken him long to find a new group of criminals to hang out with. They were there in front of Spicer's Deli, probably figuring out how to rob it. My brother sat on the stingray that wasn't his. I guess it belonged to some weaker member of the pack. And he was probably talking about how hard life was there where we had come from, and how he'd been in a knife fights that were for real, and how he'd even seen a teacher get knifed, which was, of course, all a lie, but my brother lied. What can I tell you? But when he pulled up his shirt and showed the long scar he had gotten from climbing over a fence, which was what he was doing right now, pulling up his shirt, who could tell if it was a scar from a blade or actually the fence like it really happened? I moved back into the shadows beneath the tall maples in the front of the library, and I didn't move. That's how the pack detects you. You move, and then they see you out of the corner of their beady yellow eyes, and then they swarm you for the kill. Which is why I did not move when I felt a large, wet, sloppy plop drop down from me from the branches overhead. And large isn't the right word for it, and drop isn't the right word for it either. Think pour down for drop down, and then you'll have it right there. There was a rustle, and a crow flew away, grinning. I did not move. The plop slimed over my hair and over my ear, and then onto my neck and onto my collar of my t-shirt, and still I didn't move. But I waited. I could feel the bird poop starting to crust over the heat, and still I didn't move. But I waited. Until finally, Mr. Spicer came out and hollered, and my brother hollered back and stood up in his stingray, and he was really pretty good at bouncing on that thing. And then he looked my way. I think my heart stopped, and I almost panicked and moved. But someone must have laid something, probably God, and so he turned and headed the other way on his bike, hollering over once Mr. Spicer before he left. The jerk. And my heart started up again. So I waited in the shadows until he biked around the corner with the rest of his pack, and then I reached up to wipe off the bird poop. Except before I could wipe off that bird poop, I heard Lil's voice. "Did you know that half of your head is covered in bird droppings?" she said. "It's not bird droppings," I said. "Oh, it's not?" "Dropping. It's one dropping, not dropping. It's not like I just stood there and let this army of birds poop on me or something." "So you just stood there and let only one bird poop on you? Good for you, kid." "I didn't let it poop on me." "Oh, so is it not on you then?" Do you know how she said, "oh"? It wasn't like she was figuring something out and had just gotten it. It was like she was saying that I was the jerk of the world, which I had been hearing a lot lately. It sure is a mess. When you have hair as black as yours, it really does show all over it. "Thanks," I said. "Do you need some help cleaning it up?" she asked. "And by the way, and not that I think you're not too smart or anything, but I just want to make sure. You do know that she wasn't really offering to help, right? I'm just letting you guys know. Lil is being a jerk." "No," I said, "I don't really need your help. And if you ask me, you are someone who needs a lot of help." She turned and looked back at me. "Maybe you should try going under a sprinkler." And at that moment, she smiled helpfully. I smiled back and I watched her right away. And then I reached up and I felt the bird poop in my hair. It was crusty, all right, but it was still sticky enough to smear. I rubbed as much as I could out of my hair and into my fingers and then onto the grass, but I didn't get much out before it all hardened. So I did go under those sprinklers again on my way home. Honestly, it wasn't a bad idea. The third time, though, that I saw her, I didn't look like a chump. At least at first. I was spading up a place for a garden in front of the dump, and I'm not lying, this was hard work since no one had ever spaded up there around since forever. It took all morning, but I'd almost finished when Lil Spicer came running up on her bike, and in her basket she's got these plants. It was the eeriest thing. It was like we'd had the same dream or something. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. "My mother said to send these over," she said. "How'd you know I was digging up a garden?" Lil got off her bike and put down the kickstand. "My mother is weird like that when it comes to plants. She always knows." She reached into her basket and held them up. "They're daisies," she said. They were long and bright white blossoms fell out of the damp newspaper. We planted them together, and then we watered them, and then we tightened the soil around them. It means something, when people plant things together. By the time we were done, these daisies were strutting their white hairs out in front of the dump, which didn't look quite so much like a dump anymore. My hands are all dirty, Lil said. I almost reached out to hold them. I think she would have let me. How come when you're feeling good like this, something always has to happen to wreck it all? How come? So we're standing there, Lil and me. Lil holding her hands out on my brother. My jerk brother comes riding up on a stingray. He gets off and looks up at the daisies, then he looks it up. Nice, he says. Thanks, Lil says, because she doesn't know yet that he's a jerk, and she doesn't know, like you know, that he's not really saying that they look nice. Looks like they need some water, he says. At this moment, my stomach starts to twist up. No, they're fine, I say. Oh yeah, we've already watered them, says Lil. You haven't watered them enough, says my jerk brother. And then he walks over them and he stands next to them. He leans down over the first flower and then he lets out a huge glob of spit. Spit almost as big as that bird poop. And it falls right into the flower and its head bobs down with all the weight of the spit. And then my jerk brother leans over next to the next flower and he lets fall another glob of spit onto that as well. Lil gets on her bike and at that moment she rides away. My brother spits on every one of those flowers. Big globs that he hacks up from deep into the lungs somewhere. Looks a lot better now, don't you think, Duggo? And I just stood there looking like a chump. You see how things never go right when you're feeling good? You see how things never go right when you're feeling good? My father said that night. You work like a freaking dog, and then you get ahead in the production because you've been doing good. No, you've been doing a great job, and so you take a few minutes for lunch to relax a little. Who cares if you're taking a break? Then you're still making your quota, so who freaking cares? But it turns out that Mr. Big Bucks Ballard cares, and he lays into you for coming back late, like it's going to cost him a whole $1.50. We don't get things done around here by coming back late, he says to me, and then I come in, trying to not make it happen again. I'll try to make not a freaking habit out of it if I want to make a freaking habit out of it. That's what I want to tell him. And stuff like that, though the meatloaf and the green beans and the canned peaches. And who does he think he is, says my father. I almost said that maybe Big Bucks Ballard thinks he's my father's boss, but I'm not an idiot. My father's hands were twitching like they wanted to flash out, and I didn't want them to be flashing out anyway in my direction. So I just shut up and I ate, which is what he would have told me to do if I had said anything anyway. My mother mostly just looked out the window. Things never go right when you're feeling good, my father said again. And then my father and my brother left, and I helped my mother bring the dishes into the kitchen. Thanks for the meatloaf, Mom, I said. Thanks for the daisies, she said. I'll dry, I said. That smile, that mother's smile. The next Saturday deliveries went better, mostly because I remembered the routes. Evelyn Mason of Gardner was waiting for me in the back door, which she held open as I carried her bags of groceries in and put them on the kitchen counter. You're so skinny, she said. I think that's everything, I said. I want you to sit right down there and pour yourself a glass of milk. And then she opened up the box of cinnamon donuts that I had delivered. You don't know how much I love cinnamon donuts. I had two of those cinnamon donuts with a glass of milk. Evelyn Mason looked as happy as I probably looked. I'll order some chocolate donuts for next week, she promised. And I didn't tell her not to. And on the next run, I got turned around and had to ask a mailman where Loeffler House was. And I showed him my map. You need to be on Washington Street, he said. It's parallel to this one, but it's 2 blocks that way. And when I got there, Mr. Loeffler was sitting on his front porch with a light bulb in his hand. He stood up when he saw me, turned the corner. Exactly who am I? You're just exactly who I've been waiting to see, he said. I'm not late, I said. No, I just need someone to change that light bulb on the back door. I'm a little shaky on the ladders, you know. So I changed his light bulb while he held the ladder. I climbed down and I looked at him, and he looked a little shaky on the ground too. Is there anything else I can do for you? We all went over to the house and changed about 6 light bulbs. He must have spent a lot of time in the dark. That's just great, he said. He was pleased as all get out, you could tell, and he handed me a $1 bill. For your services rendered, he said. And on the last run in town, I went to the Doherty's place first. They were the people whose ice cream had melted last Saturday. Mrs. Doherty met me at the back door. 5 kids watched through the screen while she inspected the ice cream straight off. Did the ice cream melt again? The little one asked her mother. No, Phronsie, not this time. That's good, because if it melted, then Ben and Jewel and Davy said they were going to have to kill you. I looked at the three boys, and they all smiled at me. Not really, they said. Don't be too sure, Mrs. Doherty said to me. And when all was said and done, I went back to head to Mrs. Windemere's. It was a load pretty much like last week's, a little bit more, though, $23.65. Don't forget the money, said Mr. Spicer, and I promised I won it. Don't ever turn your back, said Lil. Lillian, said Mr. Spicer. I warned you, she said. And it was a day more hot than hot enough to make you work up a sweat. But the blue of the air went forever, and the houses gave out, and the road passed into the open field, and there was the sound of cicadas. Marysville didn't seem so bad. Except it would have been a whole lot better with a really, really cold Coke. Or if Joe Pepitone and I were side by side trading stories, and then we stopped for a while and threw in the field of the cicadas. That would have been even better. That would have been a whole lot better. So I was looking out in the field, thinking about throwing with Joe Pepitone, and then this thing happened. Maybe the god of creativity flew by and brushed up with me on the wing. I don't know. But suddenly out in the field, it wasn't Joe Pepitone I was throwing with. It was Lucas. Which, just so you know, would have never happened. But I could see us. Lucas, you see, he was back in Vietnam, and me, I was throwing out of the field with a blue summer day. And like that, throwing back and forth with the sound of the bees and the high-up birds and the leather smell of the gloves and the small ball smacking into them, Lucas was laughing in the sun. It was almost like seeing a ghost. And I got to Mrs. Windemere, and I could hear her typing and dinging, so I went back to the back door, and I found the cleverly hidden key and brought in the groceries and put them away, starting with the ice cream. And then I swung the kitchen door open, and I headed into the house to get my $23.65. I followed the sound of her typing and dinging until I could see her through the glass door, typing madly in another opera dress. Pencils still stabbed through her hair, hands flying like birds in panic. But before I knocked, I went into the blue room. I don't know how long I stood there staring at that picture. I didn't even hear the typing and dinging stop or Mrs. Windemere coming into the room. Aren't they beautiful? Said Mrs. Windemere. And I nodded. What kind of ice cream did I order this week? Peppermint. What kind of birds are they? Audubon called them the red-throated divers. They're sort of a loon. It's a lovely family group, I think. I ordered peppermint, you say? Some family, no one's paying attention to the mother. But who could blame her if she took off? Look at them. A minute or two went by, and then Mrs. Windemere said in a voice as soft as the summer blue air, Skinny delivery, boy, you have it all wrong. Look how she's standing close to her little one. She's looking around to watch for the next spectacular thing that's going to come into his life. And I'm not lying. She was right. After dropping off the wagon and pocketing $10 for my pay, plus Mr. Loeffler's dollar, plus a $1.35 tip from Mrs. Windemere, and drinking a really cold Coke with Lil, and not telling her a thing about Mrs. Windemere, no matter how hard she tried to make me, and not burping when I got out to the street, I went to the library. Mrs. Merriam glanced up when I came in. Oh, it's you, she said in that disgusting thing on the bottom of my shoe type of way. But I just ignored her and went upstairs. The lights were on, and Mr. Powell was standing in the glass case. He looked up at me, and I came over. And the 3 black sheets of paper were still there, but there was another pencil, a light blue one. I moved the sheets over, and I looked down at the Arctic tern. Those sharp wings, the neck, the beak, everything dropped towards the cold, cold sea. That terrified eye. I let my hand follow the lines after the glass, and I stopped over my eye, my fingers moved. I don't think I know your name yet, said Mr. Powell. It's Doug Swiatek. Mr. Powell held up the black pencil. Mr. Swiatek, would you like to try to draw it? He said. I don't know how, I said. Then let's begin, said Mr. Powell. And I'm not lying, when I took that black pencil in my fingers, it felt spectacular. Guys, that is the end of chapter 2 here. Some things I did want to point out. We were introduced to a couple new characters. We were introduced to Mr. Spicer. We were introduced to Mr. Powell, and we were introduced to Mrs. Windemere and Miss Merriam. Throughout this book, I want you guys to keep in mind how different people affect Doug's life, especially the adults of his life. I want you to keep in mind just are these people good role models? Are they bad role models to them? Because you're going to notice that there's very much two extremes in this book. There's a lot of people who are going to be really good role models for Doug, and there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be very bad role models and be very bad influences on him. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this second reading of chapter 2. Please, everyone, be safe out there and just, I guess, enjoy your time and keep up with your reading. So, goodbye, everybody.